Hi, this is just a brief tutorial again about how to graph piecewise functions. Piecewise functions, you're just going to be graphing pieces of graphs. So we're just going to graph one piece for this, for example. So we normally know how to graph x plus 4. We would start at 4, and then we would follow the slope up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. You know, you could go down left, and you'd have this line that goes through all of those points. But what we're doing is we're graphing a piece or a part of the function, and we're restricting, this is just restricting the domain. And again, what that means is we're only graphing the function for certain x values. So we want to only graph it for x values that are less than 2. So for example, this point that I have has an x value at 3. We don't want that point because it's not less than 2, so I'm going to erase it. We also don't want a point at 2. What we want is we want every point, every x value up to 2, and the way we show that is we have an open circle at 2. But then we do want every point that's less than 2. This is at -2. We want to point at -3. We want to point at -4, -5, at -6. And so what we do is we're just graphing part of this graph, and it's going to continue to go to the left because we're graphing everything that is less than 2. So that's just how you graph a piece of a graph. Let's practice one more. So this again is another graph. We could graph this by either making a t-chart or by first following this would tell us to go to right 3, and this tells us to go down 2. So if I go right 3, 1, 2, 3, if I go down 2, 1, 2, I would have a point here. And again, if I made my t-chart, what I'm doing would be plugging in that value. I'd be plugging in 3 and I'm getting out -2. I could plug in 4. If I plug in 4, 4 minus 3 is 1, 1 squared is 1. That'd be -1, and I have a point here. And I'm making a parabola, so it would look like this. There'd be a point again at 2, -1. I could plug in 5. 5 minus 3 is 2. 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 2 is 2. So at 5, I'm up at 2. If I plug in 1, I get the same thing. If I plug in 0, 0 minus 3 is 9. 9 minus 2 is 7. So I have a point way up here, which means at 6, I'd have a point way up here. And I could keep going and making my chart, but what we're seeing is we only want x values that are greater than -1. We haven't even graphed -1 yet. So I want to plug in that point as well, -1. -1 minus 3 is -4. -4 squared, well, that's 16. 16 minus 2 is 12. So at -1, I'm way up here at 12. And it's included, so that's why I'm going to have a closed circle this time. And I do want all of the points that are getting bigger. Now I'm at 1, I'm at 2, I'm at 3, I'm at 4, I'm at 5, I'm at 6, and I want to keep going, so I could use an arrow on this side. I don't have an arrow on this side because I'm stopping there. So I'm just graphing pieces. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put it together. So when we put piecewise functions together, we really want to look at that domain, because that domain is going to tell us what values should we plug in for x. So in this first piece, I have my x and my y for my t-chart. It says plug in 3, and then plug in values that are larger than 3. So 4 is larger than 3, 5 is larger than 3. So then I just plug in 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. The absolute value of 4 is 4, plus 5 is 9. Plug in 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. Plug in 5. 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 plus 5 is 11. And so what happens is I want to graph every point that is larger than 3. So I go to 3. I says I should go up to 9. But I don't want that point. This would show me that I want an open circle. So at 3, I need an open circle at 9 because it doesn't actually get to 3. It's just above 3, like at 3.11. But I do have a point, though, at 4:10. So there would be a point here. And there would be a point at 5:11. And it would keep getting larger, so it's going to keep moving to the right. And so that's why I put an arrow at the end pointing to the right. The second part of my function, or my piecewise, is this second one. This one says pick values that are less than 3. So again, when values are less than 3, oops, you went x and your y, you still include 3, and now you pick numbers that are less than 3. 2 is less than 3, 1 is less than 3, and now you just plug them in for x. 3 minus 3, 0. 2 minus 3, -1. 1 minus 3, -2. And again, this should be a closed circle because it equals. So at 3, 0, I have a closed circle. Notice this one's open, this one's closed, so I have a point at 3. I have one point at 3. At 2, I have a point at -1. At 1, I have a point at -2. I could even plug in 0. I'd have a point at -3. And I'd keep seeing my graph continue to go down to the left. And so I would use an arrow to point that direction. So I made, again, piecewise is graphing 2 different pieces. Okay, we're going to do one more example. This one has 3 different pieces. So for this top graph, again, I'm just looking right here first. That tells me what numbers I'm going to put into my t-chart. So I'm going to put in x, y, and it says start with 2 and pick numbers that are greater than 2. 3 is greater than 2, 4 is greater than 2, and I usually pick 3 numbers just to see what it is. And then I plug those in. 2, plug them in right for x. 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 2 is 5, 4 plus 2 is 6. And again, just by looking at this, I know that I should have an open starting circle. So at 2, 4, I'm going to have an open circle, but at 3, 5, there's going to be a closed because it's a point. 4, 6, there's a closed. And what happens is my graph continues to go up 1 over 1 that way. So this is an arrow. So a little bad arrow, but that's an arrow. So that's my first function. I'm going to use a different color. For this middle function, I'm only going to use the numbers that are listed here. So I'm going to make my t-chart. It tells me I should start with -2, and it should go all the way up to 2. So I could do -1, I could do 0, I could do 1, I could do 2, but I'm going to stop once I get to 2. And then I'm going to plug them in. -2 squared is 4. -1 squared is 1. 0 squared is 0. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. And I'm just plugging them right in for this x. This side at the 2 should be open. At this side, it should be closed. So if I go to -2 up to 4, this should be, as it says, an open circle. Then I have a point at -1, 1. I have a point at 0, 0, 1, 1, and then I have a point at 2, 4, and this time it says it's closed. So that means it's like I'm filling this dot in, and I'm only going from my open circle to my closed circle for that piece of the puzzle. So now I have 2 of them that are connected. They don't always have to connect, like our last example, but sometimes they do. For the last problem, again, this tells me what should go into my t-chart, x and y. I start at -2, and it says make numbers that are less than. So -3 is less than, -4 is less than, and then I just plug them in for this x. So -2 times -2 is +4. +4 minus 3 is 1. -2 times -3 is 6. Minus 3 is 3. And -2 times -4 is 8. Minus 3 is 5. So now, again, this is a closed circle at -2, 1. So at -2, 1, this one's closed. Notice there's one point at -2, but they don't happen to touch this time. Then I have another point at -3, 3. And I have another point at -4, 5. And so for this third piece, my graph is going to continue to grow this way. And so I put an arrow on that because it says it's less than. So now if you look at this, I have three pieces. I have this red piece, that's the first equation. I have the green piece, which is the second equation. And I have the blue piece, which is the third equation. So I put it all together, and it's a piecewise function because there are three different pieces. Again, sometimes the circles fill in, but sometimes they don't. We call this just a jump. Other times we just call it continuous. So that is how you graph piecewise functions.